welcome to Is There Fudge on Mars with Steve Maltz, David Jones, and myself, David Shepherd. I'm going to make a disclaimer right at the beginning of this session, which is that none of us are really theologians, although there's a little bit of theology in our background. We're just really three older Christian guys trying to make sense of the world we live in. I'm going to try and keep quiet today. Now, that's a first for me, and I probably won't keep to my promise, but I'm going to allow David and Steve to do most of the heavy work on this subject. And the subject is going to be anti-Semitism. Something that's very relevant at the moment because of what's going on in the world. But I'm going to ask Steve to start off. Steve, what qualifies you to talk about anti-Semitism? You know, what's your experience of it been?
Well, I suppose I could say firsthand because of my Jewish background, but funnily enough, I'd never really experienced it growing up anyway. When I was at school, there were a few Jewish chaps, and two or three of them became quite famous. One of them has ended up as a Daily Mail journalist, and the other one became one of the top QCs in the country. I won't mention his name because he was actually one of the thickest boys in the class, and he ends up as basically a lord, you know. So you just don't know. But we didn't actually see much of it, even though we were growing up in the 60s. It was going through a period of time when it was I'm afraid the Pakistani chappies that were being bashed, not the Jews so much. Most of the anti-Semitism was in an earlier time after the war. My dad, even during the war, he actually had to change his name. His name sounded too Jewish. So he actually totally changed his name when he was called up for war service. So he went from, because his first name's Jaime, you know, you could get more Jewish than that, from Jaime Maltz to Len Martin. So I said to him afterwards, wouldn't it have been easier if you just kept the same initials and called yourself Harry Martin? You know, at least you've got the HM. So I don't know where Len came from, but that's what he felt he had to do. Otherwise, he would have experienced anti-Semitism in the army. And he was quite young. He was only 18 or so, and he couldn't cope with it. So a lot of his friends have called him Len for his whole life ever since.
Right.
Some people know him as Len. So anyways, that's by the by. In terms of anti-Semitism, yes, I think certainly in my experience, it hasn't been as bad. But maybe I'm not high profile enough to attract such sort of negativity.
But you've been aware of it, Steve, and you've certainly written about it in some of your books. And I know that we're not going to give too many things away, but you have been writing about it fairly recently.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So this is like something very strange. Something within. It's like one of those mirrors when you look in a mirror and there's a mirror behind you, and you see a whole tunnel of mirrors going all the way back. Well, in the book I've just written, which was a week or so ago, it was a fictional story of a chap looking at what has happened with Israel and Gaza and trying to make sense of it. He's just an ordinary bloke. And part of his journey involved listening to a podcast, which, funnily enough, was called Is There Fudge on Mars? And as a result of that, he listens to a program about anti-Semitism, which we're doing now, even though I wrote it 2 weeks ago. So the assumption is that we're going to come up with such a fantastic show today that it's going to feature in the book that I've already written. And he's, in fact, already met me in a Costa's coffee bar. He's met a character called Steve, which so it's all a bit weird. But I just think it's a subject which it basically, it was behind our whole idea of doing these podcasts, wasn't it? The very first one we did in December, we called Now Everything Changes. And that was a result of October the 7th.
So any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental.
We're not real. We're AI.
Oh, are we? Oh,
we're not really here.
Well, that explains why I don't know what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And why David speaks in a strange accent.
Yeah, well, he says I sound like I don't like. Yeah, let's not go there. But I can do an attempt at a Liverpool accent, but apparently it doesn't hold water. So, David, let's come to you really, because I mean, you've had an interesting connection to this with your investigations of the Holocaust, haven't you?
Yes, my background to this actually starts at 3 months age in the womb, which must sound very strange to listeners.
Is it?
And Steve may recall this story. I've told it on more than one occasion. So my mum was badly hemorrhaging with the pregnancy, and she was rushed into the local infirmary. The doctors there had decided to take her down to the operating theatre to remove what they thought was the remains, basically, of the fetus, i.e. me. But for some reason that I was never able to quite understand, my mum's own GP, a man called Dr. Irving, was called, and he arrived at the hospital, and he basically took complete charge and told the other doctors, even though they were consultants, that over his dead body was Frances going to be, that's my mum's name, Frances, or was my mum's name. Frances was not going to be taken down to the operating theatre, and that if she was going to lose the pregnancy, she was going to lose it naturally. 6 months later, obviously, I was born, and the doctor, the GP, had made a brilliant call. And my mum was so grateful that she said to Dr. Evan, listen, how can I ever thank you? And he turned around, he delivered 3 of my mum's babies up to that point. And he turned around and just said to my mum, listen, Frances, I would never normally ask you this, but would you consider calling your son David? Now, I didn't know anything about that story until I was a teenager when my mum told me about it, because I started to develop an interest in the Holocaust and in the history of the Jewish people long before I became a Christian. And I was so fascinated by what I was told that I basically made a silent commitment to myself that I would do everything in my power for the rest of my life to stand in solidarity with the Jewish community.
But why was David then? What was the significance?
The David thing was because Dr. Irvin's family had fled the pogroms in the Soviet Union. So the family had arrived here. They were all Jews. And obviously David is a Hebrew name, obviously associated with King David in the Bible.
I was trying to think. David Irving doesn't sort of give us much confidence.
No, absolutely not. But it wasn't that David Irving, not at all. So for those who don't know, David Irving is a well-known Holocaust denier. So from that moment on, I must have been, as I say, a teenage boy. I was absolutely determined that whenever I would have the opportunity, I would stand up for the Jewish community. And of course, to name another podcast, the rest is history, as they say. I went off to university, did a theology degree. My dissertation, as I may have said on that very first podcast, was on the origins of antisemitism. And then later I went to work for a Jewish charity called the Holocaust Educational Trust, taking A-level students over to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. I have a question for you, because this subject, I said at the outset that this subject is very relevant at the moment. Why is it relevant at the moment? What's going on?
Well, the thing that went on, if it wasn't enough, what Hamas did in that very highly documented event on October the 7th, if that wasn't bad enough, the reaction to it has sent shockwaves, not certainly to the Jewish community, but to the thinking world. People actually thought, a lot of the intelligentsia in this country, before October the 7th, if you'd asked them, has Britain dealt with the subject of anti-Semitism, and a lot of them would have said yes. There was a blip of the Labour Party with Jeremy Corbyn, but in general, it was felt that anti-Semitism had been dealt with, and Jews were seen in general as accepted members of society. Then came October the 7th, and virtually from that day onwards, suddenly all the, let's say, I was going to say like the insects crept out. It's like all those who had any negative feelings towards the Jews, particularly for some reason from the far left, which is a separate issue, suddenly they felt free to vent their feelings. without feelings of being standing out in any way, because it was the norm. It became the norm, and it's becoming increasingly so now. We're hearing, particularly in universities in this country as well as in America, anti-Semitism is just so at the front. And you think, is this sparked off just by one regional dispute in the Middle East? When we think about how many wars there are around the world, why should this one create a sort of tsunami of hatred towards the people who are only, let's say, loosely connected to those who are creating the problem in the Middle East? You have to say there's something deeper going on in this one situation. And it is. We Christians, not all Christians, but most Christians will know that it's because there's a spiritual battle going on. And anti-Semitism is the symptom of it. So
but there would be some people, Steve, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, who would say, well, actually, protesting against what's going on in Gaza is justified. David, what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I want to echo everything that Steve's just said. I'm in complete agreement with it. This week, I've been listening to a new dramatization of George Orwell's 1984 on Audible. And one of the things that clearly comes across on that is just how contemporary it feels, given the current state of play around Israel, Palestine, Gaza. And in the dramatization and in the book, you obviously have this idea of the thought police marshalling people's ideas, marshalling people's thoughts and what they can say and what they can't say. And their perspectives must thoroughly align with Big Brother. And if they don't align with Big Brother, then, you can face penalties, you can face persecution, you can face punishments. And I think we've seen that over the whole issue, which is totally separate, but over the whole issue of things like gender ideology, which led obviously to a number of people being cancelled and losing their jobs at university. And I think we're seeing that repeated now with this issue. And as Steve's already alluded to there, the state of what's happening on university campuses, where Jewish students are being intimidated and jostled and unable to get to their classes. And I do find it really interesting that the people who are preventing them from doing so these would be, for some part, they would be Muslim students. They would be people on the extreme left, again, as Steve's already mentioned. And then there would seem to be other groups who seem to have this out-and-out hatred to Israel, which I do think is anti-Semitic, and maybe we can come back to that. But it's interesting that the students who are intimidating the Jewish students, they're always masked. They're always covered up. They never want to show their faces. They never want to take ownership of what they're doing. And all the Jewish students, none of them have got face coverings on. They're just going about their ordinary business. And I do think that does really have echoes of what you read in George Orwell's novel.
And also they won't indulge in debate. So if a Jewish student will say, "Why are you doing this? Explain yourself," they just stare at them, simply because I don't think they know what to say. Because they're just towing the party line. They're told what to say, and when you go beyond the set script, there's nothing more, is it? There's no foundations. There's nothing, and that is so 1984. It's just unbelievable. And why people can't see that? It's just unbelievable, isn't it?
I saw something, I'm not sure where, on television, I think, where a guy was saying, look, these people who are protesting don't actually know their history. They don't know actually how many times Israel has offered to come to the table to set up a two-nation state, and it's been rejected by Hamas. And they don't understand that Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, that their intent is always for the complete destruction of Israel.
Well, there is a reason they don't want to understand, because they don't need to understand, because they are driven by hatred. And as I said in my book, hatred is the enemy of truth, particularly in this case. So if they've got hatred in their hearts, and this is a general human principle, you'll justify it in any way. You know, if someone comes up and gives you the 100% solid, absolute truth, it wouldn't matter because this hatred comes from a different place. It doesn't come from reasoned thinking. It doesn't come from logic. It just comes from a really dark place. And a lot of the people out there, maybe they're discovering this hatred and possibly they may even be shocked that they are exhibiting it, but they don't know what to do with it. I can't believe that all those students who, let's face it, were probably quite clever to get to university to start with, when you see them becoming like these monosyllabic chanting, well, I don't know what word to use, but that surely is not how they would want to be defined. You know, when they look back from 10 years ahead, look back, what did you do at university? Oh, I covered my face up and I stopped Jews from coming into, you know, it's like, is that really them? And I feel sorry for them. I actually feel sorry for the protesters because they're not being allowed to be themselves. And that's how insidious this whole thing, what this hatred has done. And so it's done as much damage, I think, to the perpetrators as it has to the Jewish people. Which, you know.
I still think there's probably some Christians even who would say, well, the destruction of Palestine, of Gaza, and the number of people that have been killed actually does require a response to what Israel has done. And they may not understand the full issues, but I suspect, I would feel some sympathy, not necessarily with the way in which people are protesting, but actually recognizing that it is almost like a genocide taking place in Gaza.
Well, for a start, and we're as guilty of this as anyone else, is that we are at the mercy of the algorithm. So, news stories come to you according to what your tastes and what your inclination is. So they'll never get Douglas Murray or Ben Shapiro, and at the same time, we probably won't get Jeremy Corbyn and George Galloway. So we tend not to hear the other point of view. But
well, I think that's the case. I just wanted to balance it a little bit and to say, look, we're not without empathy for what's happening to the people of Gaza. It's how we express that, I think, that is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've got to be seen to be doing it with love, and we can speak truth and we can speak sanity into it, but it may come across as cold because, as you say, there are still innocent Palestinians, and they are innocent, the ones that are being killed. But we do know the reason for it, and I particularly don't want us to sort of delve into politics, and because it's the same old thing. We have to, we can talk about what Hamas is doing as much harm to their own people as the Israelis are. And, the Israelis have always ever been just interested in self-defense, etc. We can go along that line. But I'd rather that on this discussion that we go down to the causes.
Yes.
The anti-Semitism at the heart of it, because it's the truth that we need, and it's not emotion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Before we do that, I would like to look at a definition of anti-Semitism. And it seems to me, I did a little bit of research, that various organizations, including, I think it's the Mayor of London and the London Assembly, and quite a few other organizations have adopted this definition.
Oh, yeah.
Which comes from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance.
And Jeremy Corbyn did not want to adopt it, did he?
Really?
I remember that 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
Well, let me just read it to you. It's quite lengthy, but I think, stop me at any time and intervene and make comments if you need to. But in the spirit of the Stockholm Declaration that states, with humanity still scarred by anti-Semitism and xenophobia, the international community shares a solemn responsibility to fight those evils. The Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial called the IHRA plenary in Budapest 2015 to adopt the following working definition of anti-Semitism. Let's just go to it a little bit further down. Manifestations of anti-Semitism might include the targeting of the State of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity. Not quite sure what that means. However, criticism of Israel, similar to that leveled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. It is expressed in speech, writing, visual forms, and action, and employs sinister stereotypes and negative character traits. So that's saying that we can't not criticize parts of what Israel, some of the things that Israel does.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, David. So my understanding of anti-Semitism is almost to say what anti-Semitism isn't.
Yes.
So anti-Semitism isn't attacking somebody because they're different. That's xenophobia. Anti-Semitism isn't criticizing Israel, because Israel, you can criticize democratic states, and Israel is a democracy.
Yeah.
So you can do that. You can take umbrage with any decision that, like you can with our own government, that the Israeli government makes, be that against the Palestinians, against Gaza, about what's happening in the West Bank, about rogue elements within the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, or whatever. Everybody's got a right to criticize that, and all three of us, I guess, would do on certain occasions. I saw some footage at the weekend of somebody from a Jewish settler in the West Bank who was behaving absolutely despicably towards a Muslim who was living there. So, and we must call that out.
Yeah, great. That's good. That makes
so
that
there's
clear.
nothing wrong with criticizing that. And then just one final thing I would say about that is, I think anti-Semitism is far more dangerous than that, because it means persecuting Jews and denying them the right to exist as Jews with the same rights as everyone else, which I think is what that definition was on about.
Yeah, and it goes on. Point one is calling for aiding or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. And that's very much what we see with Hezbollah, Iran.
But don't we think it's
Hamas?
Strange? We think it's strange that the big word that's been bandied about against the Jews and against Israel is genocide.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
And yet it's genocide that they're promoting themselves in their own marches with from the river to the sea. Palestine shall be free. That is pure genocide. And this is not just a hastily thought up slogan. It's been around for years. And it's always been the idea of having a Palestinian state instead of the Jewish state, and for every Jew to be thrown into the sea, basically.
Yeah.
So if that's not genocide, so you can see in the spirit of 1984, the truth has actually switched around. It's turned on its head. And to blame the Jews for what they're doing themselves is a way of deflecting from what they're doing in their own protests.
Well, that's a good point, Steve.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next one, which I think is very interesting. Making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, all the power of Jews as a collective, such as, especially but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions.
Yeah, I think we sort of covered it last week, didn't we? When we looked at conspiracies, how many conspiracies tend to involve Jewish people at the heart.
Yeah.
And of course, we did at length cover the protocols. We don't really want to do that again.
No.
Well, I think within the last millennium, you can see that, and what's happened is anti-Semitism has mutated, particularly in the heart of what we would call Christian Europe.
Yeah.
So it began that Jews were being persecuted in the Middle Ages because of their religion. And Jews were picked upon for being poor, and Jews were picked upon for being rich. Jews were picked upon for being communists. Jews were picked upon for being capitalists. And then it mutates.
Yeah.
You have this very strange and disturbing and chilling, which directly leads to the Holocaust. This idea of a sort of scientific approach to race. So what we would call eugenics.
Yes.
So therefore, the Nazis had this pyramid of peoples with, the Aryans at the top and the Jews and the Gypsies at the bottom of that pile, that pyramid. and therefore they were subhuman. They could be persecuted. They could be murdered in the most atrocious ways possible. And I think now what we've got, the current state of play, and this, some people may disagree with this. It's a contentious view, but it's one that I think we can support with evidence. I think this situation we've got now, it's mutated. Anti-Semitism, or anti-Zionism rather, is the new form of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Because it basically denies Israel's right to exist.
Yeah.
And it does it under the umbrella of human rights. That's what we get. So you can take two different views on that, David. You can either take the view that I'm a victim and therefore somebody's to blame for my problem. So I'm going to blame all these Jews. I'm going to blame Israel, even though it's like the size of New Jersey, the size of Wales. It's the only Jewish state in the entire world and in the region of the Middle East. Or you can take the opposite view and you can say, actually, are we culpable for any of this? And if you take that view, you're on the road to healing and hopefully bridge building. And I feel at the moment there is too many people entrenched in the former and not enough of these people who are protesting who are in the latter.
Yeah.
I think it's a natural part of the human spirit to look for scapegoats.
Yeah.
And the Jew is a convenient scapegoat for so many different reasons throughout history. A margin of people on the margins. It's very easy to blame them for everything, and they did that. They blamed them for the Black Death. They blamed them, for wars, for pestilences, and even weather patterns and whatever. It was just convenient because the idea of the Jewish people being so, let's say, scattered around, they didn't have the means to fight back. So you always, right up to the Holocaust, you always had the idea that the Jews were there for the taking. And this is what the world doesn't like, because the Jews are now one of the most powerful armies, and you can see what they do when you prod them. They don't just moan, that they fight back and 100-fold. And that's because it's in their psyche. Never again is something that the whole world took on as a slogan in 1948 after the Holocaust, when Israel was created. But now it's become quite hollow, and never again is happening again. But in this case, we've got a strong Israel, and that's what the world can't take. The Jews are fighting back. That there's something deep within the psyche. Maybe it's the Christian psyche. I don't know, but the idea of Jews striking back is an anathema to a certain type of person, and certainly that's what they've been preying on. That's what they've been playing on when they show you the pictures of the mighty Israeli army IDF soldiers and the poor Palestinian kids throwing the stones. It's a manipulation of your emotions to make you think there's no way that Israel can ever be seen as a victim anymore. They are the aggressor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is what people want to hear now. That because they're the aggressor, we can justify all the negativity. We can justify our anti-Semitism because they brought it on themselves.
Yeah.
But if you know the history, if you know the truth, you know that is a complete lie. But if you don't want to hear the truth, there's no point even trying to teach people. Not in this climate.
It's interesting, David, isn't it, that in the UK, or the British Isles rather, anti-Semitism, I believe the first Jews came to this country, of these lands, about 1070 after the Norman conquest.
Yeah, they came over with them, yeah.
And the first kind of real record of anti-Semitism, I think there was some kind of massacre that took place in York in about 1190.
No, there was before then. There were quite a few. They were protected when they first came over by William the Conqueror and Henry I, Henry II. But when you got to King Richard, which is 1190, there was one particular situation when King Richard was going to have his coronation at Westminster Abbey and invited the whole kingdom to come and pay homage to him. And the Jews said, "Can we come as well?" And they said, "No, don't come." But the Jews felt that they were integrated into society and they wanted to come and pay homage. And what happens when they came? There was a pogrom,
Really?
And
Golly.
they were chased through the streets of London, ended up in the Tower of London to for refuge, but many got massacred, and that's what triggered off the pogroms throughout the whole country. That was a
Right.
trigger point, 1190, and then 100 years later, all the Jews were kicked out, 1290. And,
Justification for it? What was the reasons behind it?
greed. The Jews by that point were the bankers. They were they were the bankers for the royal family. That's why they were protected up to a point, until you got to a point where they weren't needed as bankers so much, because I think there were others from Italy who were doing, Lombards, I think they were, who were able to take over. So the idea was that the noblemen, the English noblemen, instead of paying back the loans from the Jews, they would get rid of the Jews and keep the money.
Okay.
And so it's all about money, greed, power, all the usual stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
And of course, David said that things changed. The anti-Semitism that existed before did change. And I think the first time the term anti-Semitism was used was about 1879, where there was a German agitator called Wilhelm Marr, and he was designating the anti-Jewish campaigns that were already taking place in Central Europe at the time. And then obviously it went from there. I mean, a little bit more about the history of that, David?
So when my dissertation, when I was doing my theology degree, was on the origins of anti-Semitism, and actually wrote a chapter which had a bizarre title. I called it The Unholy Trinity, which was basically the church, the devil, and Martin Luther.
Right.
And that's where I, in my dissertation, firmly laid the blame for the persecution of the Jews. So if you take the church, and Martin Luther echoed this as well, part of the problem the church had is they were somewhat surprised that the Jews, once they had all the information about the Gospels and about the person of Jesus, they were surprised that they didn't convert en masse. That was Luther's problem. If you read Martin Gilbert's brilliant but very disturbing, but ultimately very moving account of the Holocaust, he lays out in chapter 1 Martin Luther's honest advice about what we should do to the Jews now that they haven't converted, and he talks about burning the synagogues. All these 500 years later, exactly the same things that the Nazis were saying.
Yeah.
So you had that element. But I think there's something deeper, and maybe this is something that people who are listening today may not want to hear, but I think it's important to talk about. How do we explain this? Steve could keep you riveted for the next 20 minutes about what's happening in the United Nations, about all these calls for certain countries and their human rights abuses and what they should do. And it would take him about a minute to go through that. He would spend the other 19 minutes talking about all the United resolutions against Israel.
Yeah.
Now, is Israel worse than North Korea? Is it worse than Iran? Is it worse than Qatar or the UAE for human rights abuses? Is it worse than China and what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims? So I don't think you can understand this unless, as Steve has hinted at earlier, you look at the spiritual element behind this. There's got to be a force somewhere that is pulling these strings. When I saw those young people this week on the campuses in America, they looked incredibly well organized, particularly the ringleaders. They look far more organized than I've ever seen them, which made me suspect that they were being sponsored, they were being funded.
There is a news story about that.
Oh, right, I didn't know that, Steve.
Yeah, it only came out yesterday that they've proved that there are agitators, professional agitators that are behind a lot of this.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. And I think there is a agitator or an agitator behind all of this. And I think there is a spiritual dimension to this that we ignore at our peril.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Steve, I know that that's something that you were really keen that we touched on when we were talking about this subject today. A little bit more from your point of view on that?
anti-Semitism has been called the many-headed Hydra, where this old Greek mythological figure with all the serpents coming out of the head, and you cut one off and another one grows. And the historians, you will not find a single historian, and I think I mentioned last week I was listening to Dominic Thingy and his mate, and they were talking about anti-Semitism, and as you know, as historians, they cover the modern and the ancient era, and they know all the stuff that we know in terms of facts of anti-Jewish hatred throughout history, but they could not find a reason for it. Historians will not find a reason, sociologists, psychologists, politicians, no one. There is no explanation for it, because it may have started off as a Christian thing. They killed Christ, Christ killers, and you still get that some in places in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. But Jews have been hated, and one was an interesting one. Voltaire, who was the French philosopher, hated Christianity. He blamed the Jews for giving us Christianity. So you can't make it up, really. So this is the problem. So you think, okay, perhaps there's a reason that our mortal physical brains cannot grasp something that is overarching, that somehow ties all these things together, and we are the only people that would understand it. And I'm not saying that every Christian does, because even this is politically incorrect for a lot of Christians to actually suggest that anti-Semitism comes from who we call the enemy, which is Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call him. He is behind it, and there's plenty of, we can give plenty of biblical proof, historical proof, and it makes sense of everything. And the thing that I always talk about to try to get this into people's heads, if you think about the Jewish people have been around longer than any identifiable people group in history. When you go way back to 2000 years BC or further, all the people that are around then are all gone. You don't get Hittites around anymore, or Babylonians. You don't get. But the Jews have always been around, and yet they've always been around, but they've always been the most persecuted people. So how on earth have they stayed intact as a people, as they have been the most persecuted people group in history? And it's a perfectly good reason, if you look at it with spiritual eyes, is that a great power has been protecting them, and another power has been attacking them. And the biggest power, being God himself, has made sure that his people have remained intact. It's not something that we take great pleasure in. You speak to a Jew, and we talk about Tevier from the Fiddler on the Roof. Choose someone else. Why are we? We've had our go. We've had people call us the chosen people. We didn't choose ourselves. 4,000 years ago, Moses and his mates, they're the ones that said, "Yeah, okay, God will be your people."
Yeah.
But they didn't realize the consequences for 4,000 years of anti-Semitism. But we're stuck with it, and it's not a label that Jews particularly like.
Yeah.
But, when you go into Orthodox communities, Jewish Orthodox communities, in some cases they feel that they are still the people of God, and they have to set an example. They are there, and whatever our theology is, their theology actually says that they are there to redeem the world. And that's the reason and that's why a lot of Orthodox Jews keep separate. That's why they look different. They've kept their ghetto garb. They haven't decided to conform in the way they look, because they want to look separate, because they see themselves as God's representatives.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to come back to that subject in a bit, the whole issue of them being God's people. But I just wanted to go back to that list of things that were in the Declaration. And I'm missing out a few, but there is a couple here which I think I'm going to link together. And I love your comments on this, which is anti-Semitism is related to denying the fact, scope, mechanisms, e.g. gas chambers, or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of the National Socialist Germany Nazis and its supporters and accomplices during World War II, the Holocaust. And the second one is accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust.
Yeah, that's something that has never gone away, David, at all. You will find that in every single country, unfortunately, be it Western Europe or countries that you would probably think, oh, well, I can understand why they think that, because they've been taught it from a very young age, i.e. a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. It should be common sense that such a view is reprehensible.
Yeah.
But it's not. And we can all agree that there have been other acts of genocide. So we can talk about Cambodia. We can talk about what happened in Rwanda. We can talk about some of the killings that happened between Serbs and Croats and Muslims in the former Yugoslavia. And I haven't got a problem with us linking those together. They are acts of genocide. I mean, Pol Pot murdered, 2 million of his own people in Cambodia. So I haven't got a problem with that. But I think the Holocaust is unique in that it was the systematic attempt on an industrialist scale to wipe out every single Jewish person in Europe. And let's not forget that Hitler nearly succeeded. There were 11 million Jews in Europe at the time. By the end of the Second World War, 6 million of them were dead.
Yeah.
So that's the scale that we're talking about. So to deny that, to minimize it, to me is actually bewildering and shocking. And anybody who does, for me, has clearly got an agenda.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, that you could rewrite effectively history to the point where you're saying something didn't happen when all the evidence is that it did happen.
It's what we call revisionist history, that. And I just refuse to take part in it, because I think we may have mentioned last week on the Conspiracy Theories podcast, there's nothing to debate, there's nothing to discuss. I remember somebody saying when Deborah Lipstadt, the lady we referred to last week, who was the chair for Holocaust Studies and Jewish History at Washington University, when she was taken to court by David Ervin, one of the things that Ervin posited was that, well, hold on a minute, why did the Zyklon B take longer to kill the Jews than it did insects or microbes that were within one of the gas chambers? As if, if that didn't really happen. And the fact was that because it does take longer. So you've got to know your facts about it. But again, even just raising that as a comment, I don't like it, because I just don't want to debate with individuals like that. What I do want to do, David, and I think it's really important that you brought it up, is I do want to alert people to it, because I think what anti-Semitism does and what denying the Holocaust does, it should act as an early warning sign, as a red flag, that once people start to hate Jews, you can be sure it will never end with Jews. We saw that time and time again. And it almost sounds selfish saying that, because we realized that actually we could be the victim next, which is what this famous Pastor Niemöller, when he wrote that was saying, first they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't stand up and speak out. Then he says the same about the communists, the trade unions. And then he says, and last of all, they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. That's the danger. We are seeing at the moment a siren going off. People should be, never mind waving a Palestinian flag, people should be waving a whacking great big red flag, because this is a real sign that if we don't get to grips with it, this will not end with Jewish people.
No, you're right. And it's just a symptom of the human spirit, unfortunately. And going back to what we talked about, the scapegoats, it'll always be the Jews. And yes, it's the health of a society. And it just shows you one event that happened on October the 7th has exposed the underbelly of our culture and of our society. And the things about the very important events that people don't realize how important they are is the Holocaust Remembrance Days in January, which our friend Moira, she organizes in our area. And it's getting more and more of a struggle to find Holocaust survivors who are still around.
That's right.
And they just say that when that generation dies out and there are no living evidence, then the deniers will have their day.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. And that's why Steven Spielberg went to great efforts to produce that great library of testimonies. I can't remember what the project was, but
Called Shoah, Steve. Shoah.
Yeah, he filmed a lot. He filmed a lot of people.
It's the French word for destruction.
Yeah. So it's a symptom. It's a symptom of a disease within the human spirit, and that's why it has to have a spiritual component to it. And that is why Christians, if they're not on the side of Israel, I'm afraid, or the Jewish people, if they're not on the side of the Jewish people, then they're on the other side. However they may dress it up, if there's any vestiges of anti-Semitism in their spirit and they haven't dealt with it, then they are going to be in big trouble.
Now that takes us full circle, Steve, back to the point that I wanted to get back to. Before we move on to that, I'm just going to say to people, there are other points in that working definition of anti-Semitism that you can find on holocaustremembrance.com. And I recommend that you go to that and have a look at it, because it is really interesting. And it's something that has been adopted by a lot of organizations throughout the world. The issue I wanted to ask you about, Steve, is you look at the Israeli nation at the moment, and arguably you could say it's mostly a secular nation. And we see the face of Jewish religion, particularly with Jewish Orthodox, where the clothes that they wear, their hair, the hats, they obviously stand out as very different. But there are different groups of Jews who are still people of faith. But why should we support Israel today if actually Israel is a secular nation? Why should Christians be picking up on the point you just made about being people who recognize that God is dealing with Israel in a certain way?
Well, Christians should know their Old Testament. They should know the prophecies about the Jews coming back to the land. And it's true when you look at the prophecies, the Jews come back to the land, but not necessarily in belief. So there is an acceptance that the Jewish people aren't necessarily coming back because they're such, religious sort of paragons. Jews and Israel is as bad as any other country. In fact, worse in many cases in terms of liberalism. There's a lot of liberalism that the government allow, certainly with the, I don't want to talk about the homosexual community so much, but outside San Francisco, I think Tel Aviv is like the second most sort of gay-friendly place, which makes you think, wow, so, if they're meant to be a religious nation and Orthodox Judaism doesn't really accept that type of thing, and yet because it's a democracy, Israel does allow different expressions, and Israel does allow Arabs to take political office. There's no apartheid. That's a ridiculous word, and there's absolutely no justification in it. Again, it's just emotionalism that's taking over. But Israel is no different to any other country in terms of the political structure. I'm talking about the Jewish people as a group under God, which is not just in Israel, but for all over the world. Jews have been kept around for a purpose, and the purpose is coming out. It's like, as David alluded to, is the Jews are like the litmus test of humanity, of society. You maltreat the Jews, there's something wrong, and we're seeing that in an explosion now, not seen before since Nazi Germany, and that's why David Jones is so impassioned about it, because he's seeing the stuff that he's researched and been a part of, he can see happening again. And it's right. So it then needs education. But how do you educate those who are caught up in the emotions of it? we are a very different society now to any previous society, in that we are governed by emotion, not by common sense.
Right.
So that is a real issue, and that is a real problem we're going to have to get people to see sense.
I'm going to go the other way now, in the sense that I read not so long ago that more Jews have become Christians, believers in the Messiah, Jesus Christ, in the last 20 to 30 years than in the previous 2,000 years. And I think, I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems to me that there is a movement amongst Jewish people to accept Christ as their Messiah. Is that true?
I think there is actually in Israel. Not, I can tell you, it's definitely not happening in the UK, because I think I know every Messianic Jew in this country. You know, it's not a growing figure in the UK, but in Israel, they're cropping up all the time. You know, fellowships, and a lot of fellowships are Arabs and Jews together, worshiping God together. And there's some real high profile places where any person that thinks that Jews and Arabs should be natural enemies, they should go to these places. And like Mount Carmel, there's one up there, and there's quite a few of them. And yes, there is an explosion. I don't know what the figures are, but I think there's a certain, when you think about an Israeli living in a country that is surrounded by, every country that surrounds them has hated them since your existence, where every Israeli has to go through a national service, not because they're forced to politically, but because out of necessity.
Yeah.
And that's what you see when a war comes up. The reservists will come, they stop their job, they get their uniforms on, and suddenly they're in Gaza or whatever. And the day before they were an accountant or solicitor or something. You don't get, the country has been a defensive country since it started, because everyone has hated it. I could give you so much
evidence
in terms of the wars against Israel about how it's been preserved, but we haven't got time for all that.
No, that's another subject we can come back to, I think. A couple of other questions for you. What do you think God's ultimate plan is for Jews and Israel? Where's all this going to? Because obviously we're seeing this anti-Semitism at the moment, but where's it leading to?
David, you want to be the theologian?
Well, first of all, nobody should be forcibly converting anybody else. I think that's the first thing to say. I was once at, I think, Steve, you may have been at the same event. I was at an event where I was one of the keynote speakers for Holocaust Memorial Day. It was an event down in London. And I was sat with a Holocaust survivor and his wife on the front row. And some of the classic tropes about Christians and Jews was being used from the platform, which was singularly unhelpful. Mm. And the Holocaust survivor turned around and whispered to me, and he said, the next thing this person is going to say, and some of my best friends are Jews.
And he did.
Yeah. So
I know you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so those things are just completely unhelpful. The other side of it is to say, look, I think we're beginning to see, but we're only at the embryonic stage of it. We're beginning to see Jews, either on their own or as a direct intervention of true friends, or even as just some kind of private investigation that they're doing themselves, discovering, or perhaps even rediscovering, that Jesus himself was Jewish, that everything about the makeup of that early movement was Jewish. And I think once people are allowed to say, read what we see as the New Testament, but obviously Jews don't say it as the New Testament. We won't go down that road, though. We could be here all night. But once they read it for themselves, they are encountering a Jewish man. And I think all of that is good. And I think we have to be really careful with this. I feel really quite uncomfortable with it, maybe because I've probably spoken to more Holocaust survivors than an awful lot of people who go and listen to this podcast because of my work with the Holocaust Trust. And I've got such good friends within that movement, people I highly respect. And so it would never have been my place during one of those seminars to actually speak about my faith in Jesus. If somebody would have asked me, of course I would have told them. So I think we have to be genteel. We have to be gentle. Sometimes we may have to challenge individuals, but I think it should always be on the proviso of, hey, hold on a minute. Let's just stand in solidarity together. And if you want to know more about Jesus, hey, listen, we're happy to talk about that.
Yeah.
It never be forced upon anybody.
It's in terms of theology, there is just one passage in the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, which describes a situation that has never ever happened in history. So it must be in the future. And that's a situation with the church being equal, Jew and Gentile together, worshipping together, no barrier between them. And I think that's what the devil has had in his sights. That's why it's never happened. It seems that in terms of anti-Semitism, no group within probably in the whole history has been as anti-Semitic to Jews as Christians.
Yeah.
And that is an oxymoron, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's absolutely unbelievable that Christian society, not talking about your average Christian on the fringe, but Christian mainstream for 2,000 years. And we can talk about church fathers. You've already talked about Martin Luther, but it just goes on. And there are plenty prominent Jewish Christian leaders now who are maybe not overtly anti-Semitic, but not necessarily pro either. And yet they need to have more of an understanding, and that isn't happening yet. So there still needs to be a lot of work for Jews and Gentiles together to come together in what's called one new man. That's the ideal, but it's not happening yet.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, David. I think we've covered this in a non-fudgy way. If I could say that.
We haven't fudged it up enough.
We haven't fudged it up. Just grateful, guys, for you being so direct in the things that you've shared, the things that you said. My prayer is very much that this podcast would be used to create greater understanding between Jew and Gentile Christian, and also for an understanding of what's going on in the world at the moment with anti-Semitism. So thank you ever so much. There will be another Is There Fudge on Mars? We haven't decided on the subject yet, but again, I'm going to say to you, we do welcome your comments. We've had some interesting comments on one of our earlier recordings, and I have to say, people don't always agree with us. That's fine. We don't mind if you disagree with us. Just be nice about it. We'll try and be nice back. And so we will welcome you again next time. But for now, it's goodbye from Steve Maltz.
Bye.
David Jones.
Goodbye, folks.
And myself, David Shepherd. Bye for now, and we'll catch you next time.